Hey guys, I made a clay wall hanging and here's what I did. I bought this air hardening modeling clay at TJ Maxx, along with these tools which I didn't end up using, and I wanted to make something with it. I saw a cool brass wall hanging online that was no longer available, so I decided to make it out of clay. First I made my templates. There were 5 columns for the wall hanging. For the first column, I made a 2-inch circle and cut it in half, creating a semicircle. For the second column, I made a 2-inch circle, a 1-inch semicircle, a 3/4 of an inch semicircle, and a 1/2-inch semicircle. For the third column, I made a 3-inch by 3-inch right angle that I used twice, and a 3-inch stick. For the fourth column, I made a 1.5-inch circle and cut an arc at the halfway point, which made a moon. A 1.4-inch semicircle, and cut 3/8 of an inch below the center that I used 3 times, and a 3/4 of an inch semicircle joined with a 1/2-inch tall rectangle. For the fifth column, I made a 1-inch circle. Then I rolled the clay flat and traced my templates onto it. I cut them out with an x-acto and pressed around the edges to smooth it out. I made holes with a T-pin near the top of each shape and the bottom of each shape that connects to another piece. Make sure that they're close enough to the edge that a jump ring will fit through it. Next I rolled clay to be about 3/16 of an inch thick. I used the corner edge to help keep its shape and cut a 3-inch by 3-inch right angle. I poked a hole through the corner and made 2 of these. I also kept the 3-inch stick and made a hole near the top. Then I rolled clay to be about 1/4 of an inch thick and cut it at 8 inches. I made a hole at every inch. There were 7 holes in total. The 2 end holes were to hang it, and the other 5 were for the columns. I waited 24 hours for all the pieces to dry. I sanded any rough areas, then painted them gold. I had some chains, jump rings, and flathead pins that I wanted to use up, but since they were old, I painted them gold with a foam brush. I made sure they were still able to move and set them aside to dry. Then cut the chains to size. I cut a 10-inch chain to hang it, a 1 5/8 of an inch chain for the first column, a 3.5-inch, a 2 3/4 of an inch, and 2 1/4 of an inch chain for the second column, a 5 5/8 of an inch, a 1/4 of an inch, and a 7/8 of an inch chain for the third, a 7/8 of an inch, 3 1/4 of an inch, and a 4 1/4 of an inch chain for the fourth, and a 5.5-inch chain for the fifth column. I added jump rings to the pieces. For the right angle pieces, I cut the end of a flathead pin, made a loop, strung the clay, and made another loop. Then I attached the chains. I added the flathead pins through the top of the 5 middle holes of the 8-inch stick. Then I made a loop at the bottom. I added the flathead pins through the bottom of the 2 holes at the ends and made a loop at the top. Then I added the 10-inch chain. Attach the columns, touch up the paint, and the clay wall hanging is done.